This is Ben Borg.
This is Katrina Borg.
This is Claire Green.
This is Maggie Morgan. And this is the More Than Macros podcast.
This episode of the More Than Macros podcast is brought to you by Married to My Macros, performance nutrition coaching. Married to My Macros is a personalized one-on-one nutrition coaching service providing the highest level of support to clients with the practical tools and accountability needed to improve health, physical performance, and body composition through diet. While this podcast will fuel your mind, let the team at Married to My Macros fuel your body.
All right. Welcome back to episode 9 of Ben and Kat's IVF journey. This is a pretty exciting episode as we can now welcome baby Mattea to the world. So congratulations, you guys. I'm so excited for you, and I'm sure everybody listening is as well. And can't wait to meet her. Maybe we'll bring her into the next episode for her first debut. But today we have
no doubt she'll make an appearance at some stage, probably over the next 30 minutes. But we'll use it as a teaser, so people don't know when she's coming in. So you have to watch them.
Yeah, they can't leave. Tangents.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot to catch up on with you guys in this episode. I think Mattea made quite the statement coming into the world. So I'd love for you guys to share that with everyone, so that you can just then send this video around instead of having to explain it every time somebody asks. Hey.
Yeah, and so I think we'll probably do a good little birth story chat. So anyone who's not wanting to listen to that, then probably skip about the first half hour of it. Just because I feel like for anyone who is listening along and has kind of been part of the journey, we're always curious about that experience, and we're more than happy to share. I know some people like to keep that private, but I think we've been pretty open with everything thus far, and exciting. It wasn't the perfect experience, but it's exciting.
There's obviously a happy ending, right? Which I guess makes the story a little easier to tell.
Yeah.
And it's something like this whole, series has been, it's something that isn't often talked about, right? And especially the struggles when it comes to birth as well. It's almost like, people don't feel comfortable sharing it, and that's one thing. But I think it's important for people to understand, what can go on in the delivery room, and just being a little bit more aware going into those situations themselves, or if they have family members or friends going into the same situation. So I think it's valuable for a lot of people.
It's interesting too, I know a lot of women don't want to hear birth stories when they're pregnant because they don't want to hear about the possibilities, whether that's so that they can just focus on some positivity around it and their plan and their execution, or there's some fear there. There's a million different reasons, and that's totally fine as well, which is kind of why I gave the disclaimer that you can probably skip half hour if that's not something you want to hear. But I think on the other hand, especially when it's your first baby and you don't know what to expect, I found it nice it was funny, we talked, I think, around 39 weeks, and I just had we have a lot of friends who've given birth in the last month to 4 months sort of thing. And, I've been chatting with these women throughout my pregnancy, but really in that last week before we delivered, a lot of them reached out and wanted to share their birth stories if I wanted to hear it. And it's really nice to kind of get that, okay, well, this could happen, and this could happen, and this could happen. And there was a lot of experiences that people had that maybe weren't phenomenal, but that, kind of helped you prepare a little bit. So I really enjoyed it. I really loved when those women reached out and shared those stories with me. And it is something that's private and personal for a lot of people too. So I think I felt very honored that they would want to share those with me or be willing to. Did it prepare me? No. And I think that, with my background in nursing, I come prepared from a medical side of things, but I also have some experience in the delivery room on the other side. I've helped deliver babies in Africa. I was there for the birth of one of my best friends, both of her children. And so I went in feeling okay, I kind of know what this could look like from the other side. Obviously, I haven't experienced it myself, but I kind of know what to expect. I did not know what to expect. I was not prepared for the experience that we had whatsoever. And I don't think being prepared would have helped necessarily.
I went the exact opposite. I had no idea like what to expect. Other than kind of, I guess, the same thing, like heard from, you know, musings of like my friends who are dads, and they're like, the thing that I was kind of expecting was there's nothing you can expect. And so I kind of have had this like blissful ignorance, like the whole point up to where we are now. I think that sort of continued. Like for me, it was like, I didn't know what to expect. I had maybe an idea of what I thought things would be like and stuff like that. But until you're actually in there, like, I don't think you can really prepare for it. And even I think in terms of how I see Kat and kind of like, you know, our relationship and stuff like that, like what I was expecting to change, and we'll get into this as well, what I was expecting to change with having a baby and that whole process, and what I feel has actually changed were two completely different things. I think whether you come from a position where you feel you know what's about to happen, or where you come from a position where you feel like you have absolutely no idea what's going to happen, you're both in the same boat, right? Yeah. And I think that, again, in terms of like for our relationship, what an experience to go through. But yeah, I think we'll get to that point too. Yeah. So, but yeah, it's kind of nice to be, it's not often that I feel like I'm in the same boat with Kat in terms of like, knowledge or understanding like, or anticipation when it comes to, when it comes, especially like in the medical field. So I guess to kind of hear that makes me feel a little bit.
You just like they're on the same. So I honestly can't even remember when we spoke last, but I think it was around 39 weeks. And had I at that point gone back and had some additional maternal and fetal monitoring done?
No, I think start there.
No. Okay. So essentially what happened is at about 38 and a half weeks, I went in for an appointment. And so with the public healthcare system, which is what we're in here in Australia, you go into a clinic and you see a different midwife every appointment. It's just whoever is on. And I kind of mentioned in that appointment the two things that I had been complaining about my entire pregnancy, which was that I was having tons of heart palpitations that had actually kind of peaked at about 30 weeks and were a little bit less at that point. And when they asked about baby's movements that day, I said, oh, she's having kind of a tired day today, but she's very active, generally speaking. And her pattern has been like this the whole pregnancy, where she will have, you know, really busy periods, and then she'll go kind of like a little quieter for the day, still move around and stuff. Then I'll get really tired. And then the next day I'm visibly larger. And so what was happening that day was nothing that hadn't happened throughout my pregnancy. But the midwife I had seen that day was like, oh, well, we should probably check some of these things out. And so sent me for some maternal monitoring for my heart, and then also for CTG, which is just monitoring of the baby's movements. CTG, I got in there and you could like see her rolling around in my belly like the second I sat down. So they put the monitor on, had me in there for like 20 or 30 minutes. They're like, she is so busy, she's so active, like everything's good here. But then when I followed up with the OBGYN after this, she's like, oh, just that you went for CTG, I think we were better off to send you for ultrasound just to make sure. So I'm like, yeah, fine, whatever. Go in, think that everything's going to be fine. The sonographer was like, everything's fine. She looks great. No need to worry. You've got great placental flow. No concerns. And then I was looking at the ultrasound reports later, and I was like, her head is less than the 10th percentile. Like, and when our baby is otherwise like 80th percentile.
Head circumference.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, that's a little unusual. And I wonder if that's an issue. I reached out to a friend who's a sonographer and kind of let her know what was going on. I was like, is this just a measurement thing at this stage? This is not something I should be worried about, right? And she said, no. She's like, it's just some babies have small heads. This isn't concerning, etc. So we go back at 39 weeks and ask the doctor about it. And he's like, oh, I don't really know. That they reported.
You'd had a Holter by that stage as well.
Yeah, so they're looking at my heart and a few other things. And he's like, oh, I'm not really sure about this head circumference. Like, if they report it under 10, it could be 10th or 9th percentile, and that's fine. He's like, but if it's 3rd or 5th, that's like microcephaly. And in the next breath, he says, also, okay, you're 39 weeks, so we need to induce you next week. You'll be having the baby by this time. And there was no kind of like break between these two thoughts. So I start panicking a little bit, interpreting this as baby might have a small head. We need to get her out. And ended up having a complete breakdown in the waiting room. And of course, Ben's not allowed in because of COVID.
So I'm in the car.
And I'm just like, and this midwife who was kind of watching over my case with all the maternal monitoring and stuff that was going on happened to walk out as I was trying to schedule my appointment. And they were saying, oh, we can't get you in for your next appointment until you're past 40 weeks. And I'm like, they want to induce me before 40 weeks. She walks out and has to like talk me off the ledge.
So maybe a little disclaimer in there. Because we're IVF, there's a higher associated risk with complications and stuff the longer you go past your due date. So he failed to communicate that being the reason they were going to book us in on the due date, rather than like segueing straight from like one potential issue into an induction. So it was more of a miscommunication than an actual issue. But obviously when you start panicking that things are going wrong and you're cat and you do have all that extensive medical knowledge,
it's not good.
Your head runs away with it a little bit. So
essentially like the rates of stillbirth increase the further you go in your pregnancy with IVF pregnancies, and they don't really know why. And so because of that, they're just a little bit more cautious, which no one had communicated with us in 39 weeks. We'd never mentioned that we wouldn't be able to go to 41 or 42 weeks.
And so that was probably for us, because it's not like we sprung it on them that we were IVF at like the last minute either, right? So I think from that point was kind of a bit of a
breakdown.
Yeah. So there was a little bit of like, you know, how much are we missing out on with all the COVID stuff going on, right? And this has kind of been a bit of a precursor, like basically from the point that we hit second trimester, which was really like Feb, March, which is when all the COVID stuff started kicking off. Really like the instruction from the hospital and you know, from the care that we were receiving was like, if nothing's drastically wrong, like don't come in. And so it wasn't even just like don't come in, but it was like there's no communication,
there's no phone,
there's there's no like, I don't know, here's a pamphlet to read about like whatever it is. Like it was really like, wow, we're scrambling to deal with what's happening with COVID. And so yeah, if it's not an emergency, like probably the best thing to do is stay home. So we'd kind of had nothing until we got to this appointment in the 39th week where it was like, you need to be induced next week. And these are kind of potentially some of the issues that are going on, right? So that was kind of the first, I know obviously Kat was worried more from like that maternal point of view. And I think for me, that was the first frustration as like a failing of like the public health system, right? And kind of just like that first experience with something where it was like, we don't have like control of how this is playing out now. And we kind of have this joke as well about like Mattea and going to school and like the difference between like public school and private school here in Australia. And I went to a private school, so I always have like this bias towards like the same thing, and Kat's like, there's no difference. And so for me, it was like, I feel like this is kind of, you know, this is the difference between the public health system and the private health system, is that you're essentially getting what you pay for, right? And so when you're not paying for anything, you don't get anything, right? And you do fall through the cracks. There's a greater propensity to fall through the cracks, right? And that, you know, Kat was going to appointments, and it was obvious that like, you know, the OBs or wherever were just like reviewing the notes as she's walking in the door, right? So for me, and this is the 38th week when we had, he had the chat with the first OB, for him to say, you have to be induced on your due date, but I'm going on leave tomorrow, and then not book us in for an induction at that hospital. Like, to me, that was like, what's going on? Like, what is going on here? And so we go back, right? You go back the following week.
Yeah, it was like 39 and 4 days or something. Yeah.
So he's like, you need to be induced and you need to come back next week on Wednesday or Monday for more like observation to see how things are progressing, but doesn't book us in for an induction at all. So we go back the following Monday, and you sit down with the new doctor.
Yeah,
right?
It was really great.
Yeah.
But just got this dumped on her lap.
And this is not meant to be like everyone that works in the public health system is incompetent and has no idea. This is more an observation of like, when you're working in a situation where many of the staff are only in the environment 1 day a week because they're between different hospitals or whatever, different practices, obviously there's not this comprehensive system enough in order to make sure that like these things don't happen, right? So this is a failing of the system, not of the individuals that make up the system, right? So we go back the following Monday, and what they do, they have a little bit of a feel around, and they make Kat an appointment for, they try to book us in for the induction, right? Because the due date is then on that Thursday. And so they want to book us in for an induction to not go past the due date. So then they look at the book 4 days beforehand, and they can't get us booked in at Box Hill until the following week, right? So from that point, it's like, okay, well, you've just told us like a week ago, because we're IVF, we're high risk, we need to be induced. And they've told us we're high risk, need to be induced, and that you don't have the capacity to induce us at the hospital where we've kind of been coming, right? So my whole thing was like, if they know we're fucking IVF from week 12 when we come into the system, why do they not book your induction then on like your due date, just as a precautionary measure? Like, or
even 2 weeks in advance, anything.
Yeah, like surely like I'm not the first person to think that, you know? Anyway, so then there's this big panic because Box Hill's packed. And so they have a sister hospital, which is like 40 minutes away, called Angus. And so what they said was, we can't get you in here soon enough, so you're going to have to book at Angus. So that was kind of like the next alarm bell, was like, the first time we're going to go to this new hospital is basically when they're about to induce Kat. And don't know my way around, don't know any of the staff there, never been in there.
It's kind of like a rural country hospital, and we didn't know anything about it. So, you know, to me, it's like, you're saying I'm high risk, you're saying I need to be induced, and now you're sending me to an outlying hospital. Is the level of care the same? Like, I don't know anything. We don't even know how to get there.
So in the end, like, I kind of get on the phone and I'm like, well, how is there not, like, they're like, oh, we're booked up. I'm like, how is there not a bump system? If you have someone who's high risk come in earlier, surely there's like, everyone gets bumped back one place, right? Anyway, apparently there's not. So from that point, they booked us in. And at that point, I said to her on the phone, if something happens between now and that induction date, do we go straight out? No, like, all your care is still here. Like, if anything happens, you'll still come here. You're still our patient. They're just going to be doing the procedure at that location for you. I was like, okay.
And then they want me to come back on Wednesday.
And then come in on Wednesday for more like fetal monitoring anyway. So I was like, all right, we get told we're going to most likely get bumped. So I say, okay, if something happens in between now and the induction date, what are we doing? And they said, you're still coming here. You're still under our kind of jurisdiction of care. So if anything happens between now and then, come here. Okay, good. So I get woken up on Wednesday morning at about 6:30, and Kat's saying, we need to change the sheets. And I was like, oh, have your waters broken? And she's like, no. Like, it's just something I want to do before the weekend. So I was like, okay, well, it's 6:30 in the morning, like completely irrelevant conversation. And she goes, oh, by the way, I think I've been having contractions like for the last hour and a half at about 10 minutes apart. But I'm not sure. Like, it's pretty faint, but I think I probably am. So that was like the first kind of like spider sense that it's like, like, here we go. But because we had the appointment booked for like fetal monitoring, it was like, all right, well, let's just see what happens. And you have to go in this afternoon anyway. So,
well, and I phoned them and I said, hey, like, I think I'm in really early labor. Like, I'm not even quite positive, but I think I have an appointment at 2 for CTG. What do I do? And they're like, yeah, just come in for that as normal. No problem. We'll figure it out then. Right.
So as the day goes on, I guess, like,
so I continue to take all my clients for the day, do all my meetings.
Yeah, we had a team meeting that morning. It was great.
Yeah, we had a team meeting, and I think Mags, you like, how are you? And Kat was like, I think I'm in early labor. It's like, okay.
All right, not surprised you're here.
So I kind of like start shifting, like, all like messaging and emailing all my clients and saying, hey, like, this is potentially the situation, might have to cancel last minute. And I think we said, as we were getting ready to go to the hospital, let's just pack the car, like, just in case we get there and they say, just stay here now, let's just kind of do it.
So I got there at 2:40, I'm still sitting there waiting to go in. And so I kind of go back up to the desk and I was like, hey, still waiting for my appointment. And like, I think like I am actually in early labor, so I don't know how long you guys want me sitting here for. And they're just like, oh my gosh, do you need to go into the birth? I was like, no. I was like, it's totally manageable right now. It's fine. So they get me in for fetal monitoring, and the woman doing my monitoring was not kind. And so she looks at me and she's like, you don't look like you're in labor. Like, you look fine. And so she puts me on the machine, and obviously on the CTG, you can see the uterine contractions, right? So it's like, you can see that I am contracting. Fetal monitoring and movement was fine. But I was telling her about the pattern of the contractions and the length, and I think I was about 3.5 to 4 minutes apart at this point. But she was saying, because if I got up and walked around, I'd actually have them more frequently, but my baseline was 3.5 to 4 minutes. She's like, well, that's not consistent. She's like, so this is false labor. She's like, you could be like this for another 24 hours, or you might kind of go in and out, and in all likelihood, you're still going to need to be induced on Friday.
So you were a centimeter dilated at that point as well?
Well, we didn't, she said, if you want, I can do an exam and check. And I'd been a centimeter dilated on Monday when I went in to see the doctor as well. And I was like, yeah, can we? Because it'll just at least give me some context. I've been in early labor for 8 hours. Like, if I'm 2 or 3 centimeters, like at least it kind of lets me know where I'm at. So she goes in, does an exam. She's like, you're only a centimeter dilated, but your cervix is like completely effaced and ready to go. In that sense, she's like, try and stretch it a little bit. She's like,
floppy nose. She said it feels like a floppy nose.
No, she's like, it's not hard like the end of your nose, which is like what it normally feels like. She's like, so things are happening, but yeah, she's like, I think you're going to be induced on Friday. And she's like, so don't come back until you're really in labor. So like contractions every 3 minutes, like really struggling at home, in a lot of pain, like don't come back, don't present before then. We'll see you in the morning. We'll do another round of CTG at that point. So they book me in for an appointment, go back downstairs and like, okay, yeah, we're not getting admitted, which is kind of what I thought was going to happen. But I said to Ben in the car ride home, I was like, I don't think I'm going to make it to that morning appointment.
So you could tell even when she got in the car by that point that she was getting more and more uncomfortable than even the 2 hours like beforehand when she'd gone in for the appointment. So
this is at like 3:30 they sent me home, right?
Yeah. So we go home and kind of just like continue on with our day, kind of keep an eye on Kat. And then at 5 o'clock, I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to just go to the park and get a workout in real quick. Because like, who knows? And honestly, by this point, like she was like uncomfortable, like almost like was getting a bit stomach achy, but not like Hollywood, like going into labor kind of like situation.
And it was just a short workout in his defense. Yeah.
So we go train, and then I get a call at like 5:30 as we're kind of packing up anyway, being like, can you please come home like right now? So I was like, oh shit. So I was like, get in the car, come back down. And Kat's like doubled over on the couch.
With my head in a bucket.
Head in the bucket, just like unable to move. And so this is again like in another hour. So things are moving like pretty quickly. She's like, all right, what are we going to do? And she's got this app where you, I guess, like track all the contractions. Yeah. And so I looked at that, and she's now at like 2.5 minutes apart with contractions lasting like 45 seconds to a minute on average. So I'm like, okay, I think it's time that we like maybe made a call and potentially head back into the hospital. Do you want to go back in? And she's like, yeah, I want to go back in. So I ring the hospital and I'm like, hey, this is the situation. We were in earlier, got sent home, but things have obviously like sped up and I'm going to bring her back in. And they're like, you can't.
Oh, no, they were like, oh, how's she managing at home? And Ben's like, not well.
Not well. And like in my head, I'm thinking like, we are not having this baby like on the lounge room floor. Like that is just not going to happen.
And they're like, oh, well, does she want to come in? And Ben's like, yeah, she wants to come in.
So then anyway, they're like, oh, well, we're bed blocked, so we can't take her. So this is like kind of throwback to the conversation we had with them 2 days earlier, where it was like, what happens if the baby decides to come before induction? And so it was like, at that point, I would have loved there may be the possibility that you have to go to this other hospital, so be prepared, it's a longer drive.
Or even 2 hours before, when I was in there in early labor, oh, heads up, our ward is quite full. You might be shifted to another hospital. And if that's the case, you're going to need a little bit more driving time to get there.
Yeah. Anyway, so they ring this other hospital who say they can take us. So I looked at Kat. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna have a quick shower because I stink, and then we'll kind of get going. And so for us, it was more like Kat was kind of just like trying to, I guess, like pick up the last bits and pieces because we still had the car packed from like earlier in the day. So really all we had to do was get in it. So we
I was
jumped in the car.
literally emailing clients up until the point when we phoned the hospital to be like, cancel this week, cancel.
Yeah. So we get in the car and it's like, she's getting more and more uncomfortable. And it's like a 40-minute drive. And so we're cruising along. And for whatever reason, like I'm trying to find like any radio station that has like any music on it, and you just happen to be in one of those periods where it's all like ads or talkback. So like Kat's just getting more and more stressed, and then she starts like hitting the dashboard, like just trying to get some music like kind of coming out of the radio. Anyway, so we get up there at about quarter past 7, and kind of go onto the ward, and it's like as you're walking into the ward, you can hear obviously like
women screaming. It's like I'm getting wheeled down this dark hallway, and there's like these animalistic screams all around me. I was like, oh no.
So it was we had so much stuff with us too. Like I reckon we had 4 bags. Like we had a bag of stuff for like baby stuff, a bag of stuff for Kat, a bag of stuff for me, a bag of food, like prep meals, snacks. I bought the laptop. Like I was like expecting we were gonna go in there and be this like 12-hour like, oh, maybe we'll watch the footy because like it'll relax her or she'll calm down, distract her if we're kind of just sitting around for hours anyway. Anyway, so by 7:30, they do another assessment. They're like, oh, you're at 4 centimeters. We're going to admit you. So I go down to emergency at this stage, right?
Because I'm not admitted
because
at
we're
that
technically,
hospital.
still at a different hospital. So I have to give her new numbers and everything else. Admit her, come back up, and she's in a gown. I was like, oh, that was quick. Like 10 minutes, and she goes, as soon as you walked out the door, like my water's broke, right? So it's like, okay, like this is probably happening, and this is probably happening like right now.
Faster than we thought.
So this is kind of 7:30, and then I guess
8:30 at 8:30 at that point.
Nah,
Yeah,
it wasn't that.
Because they marked down when my water's broke.
Was it?
I'm positive. Yeah.
So from that point, like this is where I guess the story kind of starts, and where it starts to get like pretty hectic and pretty like tense. So they get Kat and they put the CCG back on, right? So we kind of had in our birthing plan, like this is ideal situation, what we wanted, like preferably like no instruments, no like Kat monitoring for baby, like, you know, not necessarily because we don't believe in it, but just like we didn't want to like scar, or like, you know, if they had to use machines, sometimes it can leave marking and just like little stuff like that. And best case scenario, we also didn't want Kat to have a C-section, just because in terms of the recovery and stuff like that, and what that might mean for like the potential to come back to weightlifting and that kind of timeline. So we had like perfect case scenario, but also we had do whatever you need to fucking do to make sure we have a safe arrival, right?
And at this point, no one has ever asked us any of our preferences. No one has ever spoken to us about a birth plan. None of this has ever been discussed with any midwife or any doctor in my entire pregnancy.
Yeah. So we kind of knew what the plan was. And I guess for me, that was my first like fatherly role, was like, I know what Kat wants. Like I know what the kind of ideal situation is. And so if it gets to a point where she's encumbered and can't speak or whatever, at least I can like have that conversation and not be like, oh, what do you think? Like, blah, blah, blah. So like, I felt pretty good about that. And so we get in there and they put the CCG on, right?
Yeah. And they can't really, they're not getting numbers that they would expect. And so she's like, oh, it might be like mixing up the maternal and the fetal heart rate. So, you know, tried repositioning me, this and that. And she's like, oh, I don't think it is. I think that's the baby's heart rate. I want to put in the monitoring, which is like a little piece of metal that gets inserted up your vagina and into the baby's skull. And I was like, I really don't want that. If we can avoid it, can we try repositioning a bit more? She said, all right, we'll give it another shot.
So they've got Kat on a Swiss ball, like at this point, like just trying anything to get her comfortable and to try to keep the monitors.
But they're like, you can't stay there. It's not working. And she's like, you know what? I really think we need to stick this monitor on the baby. I said, okay, if we need to, like, we need to get it. Stick the monitor on the baby. And they're like, okay, it's definitely not your heart rate. It's definitely the baby's.
And it was definitely like, was fluctuating pretty high, right? So it was supposed to stay around like 140, and it was like coming down kind of 80-ish, 70-ish at that point.
Right? So yeah, and I mean, I kind of knew what was going on. Ben says, well, they don't really tell you.
Yeah, so the next thing I know, like obviously Kat has a bit of an idea. I have no clue. And then the midwife looks at me and she goes, okay, Ben, what I'm going to get you to do is just reach behind you and push that emergency button. And don't panic, but there's going to be quite a few people like coming into the room pretty quickly. So I like push the button, and then two thoughts go like through my head. So they've called a code pink. The first thought when I turn around is like, man, I've forgotten what like 12 people in like one enclosed space actually looks like, given like all the restrictions we've had over the last 6 months. And the second one is like, we're only been here half an hour and this is a situation. I feel like, you ever done a workout, Maggie, where it's like a 20-minute workout, but there's an assault bike at the start as a buy-in, and you make the mistake of like going out way too hard, and then the rest of the 20 minutes is just a nightmare because you can just, that's what I felt like was going on. I'm like, this is like not a good start. So anyway, room's full of people. I'm kind of next to Kat, and I'm like, just look at me. Like, don't worry about what's going on. I'm right here. Like it's not fine, but it's like, you're okay. Like, we're okay. Everything's okay. Doctors are doing their thing, kind of having a chat. There's a lot of like whispering and murmuring going on between the doctors, which I feel is like even worse, because it's like, can someone tell me like what's going on? Like, why are we kind of in the situation we're in?
I think it's important to know that just prior to this, I had been like delaying asking until at what I thought was an appropriate time interval after being admitted. But I was like, I'd like an epidural. Yes. At this point, like, this is just not going any sort of way that I am okay with. So I'd already asked for that prior to the code. Code gets called. I wasn't admitted. I didn't have a name band. The name band was wrong once they did have it. So they pop in an IV, get some blood work. They're like, we need to give you an injection to slow down the contractions because you're going too fast. And
baby's not able to recover. Yeah,
baby can't recover in between. So they give me that. They start running the blood work. They realize that baby was on the cord, and every time I was on my back or my left-hand side, she would decel so her heart rate would drop. And so they basically were like, okay, you need to stay on your right-hand side. So we rolled me over, got repositioned, and things settled out a little bit.
It was, yeah, so weird. When they came in, they started rolling her. It was like seeing a turtle like stuck on its back. Like, Kat can't move, and it's like 3 nurses pushing her on one side, and then 3 nurses pushing her on the other side, just to try to get baby off her cord.
Just like flipping her back and forth, which was awful.
And so in the end, they were happy with like the trace, so they can obviously look at what the heart rate's doing, and the heart rate had kind of stabilized nice and high. So the 12 of them kind of leave the room, and it's sort of us with the 2 medical staff. Kat's epidural ends up kind of being on the waiting list because they're waiting for the blood results to come back from the blood they just took, but 2, it's handover, right? So we kind of sit in this like limbo position where like, obviously she's in pain and she's getting worked up, and anyone who's seen Kat like in a warm-up area or like in the back area of the platform before a competition, unless you're a coach, if you're just the husband, there's like no right thing that you can say at any time. And so that was the kind of situation we started finding ourselves in. So she's like, I need the epidural. I'm like, it's all right, like it's on the way. And she just looks at me, she goes, if you tell me everything is all right one more time.
I was savage.
She was hard. Anyway, finally, like they come in, and this is now like 9:30.
I think also one of the like more distressing things for me, and I don't know if it was for you, was the contractions were terrible, but I also was convulsing almost like to the point of a seizure, but obviously not with like the neurological effects, like just peripheral body effects. So I was convulsing between every contract, and it was like I was so contracted I couldn't stop shaking. And I was like, stop shaking, stop shaking. And I couldn't. And researching it after, like, there's a lot of different mechanisms for that. And one theory is that it's just hormonal, but the other theory is that it's to do with blood group incompatibility between mom and baby. And there's a little bit of mixing, and that's what causes these convulsions, which myself and Mattea she's positive, I'm negative blood group. So it kind of fits with that. But that for me, because I wasn't expecting it and I couldn't control it and I couldn't rest between contractions, that was probably one of the worst parts.
So I think it was at that point too, where like, she looked at me, she's like, I think I'm going to die. Like, I honestly think like, I'm going to die. I can't do this. And I was like, well, please don't die. Like, I'm just like, what do I say to that? Like, you're doing good. It's all right. Like, I'm just like, okay, just try to breathe. They're on their way with the epidural. Like, they know you're uncomfortable. And in my head, I'm like, come on, Kat. Like, we've been giving birth for like, millions of years. Like, I'm sure that, like, I'm sure we're gonna, hopefully, get through. So she's obviously like very uncomfortable, and you just feel so useless on the sideline. And you're like, can I get you some more water? Like, mop your brow, rub your back a little bit. Like, what am I gonna do? So I'm just trying to talk to her, keep her calm, like, kind of hold her, like, just try to sort of stop her from shaking, that sort of stuff. They finally come in with the epidural at about 9:30. So we'd kind of been playing this waiting game of like having these kind of convulsions and being super uncomfortable for like an hour. And the epidural takes about half an hour to kick in. So by this stage, she wanted the epidural obviously badly, but had convinced herself that even with an epidural, the pain was so bad that it wasn't going to have an effect. It would maybe just a little bit, but it wasn't going to like take the pain away.
Which, surprise!
So
our epidural didn't work.
Yeah, so she starts getting more and more worked up about that. And then for anyone that's unfamiliar with an epidural, a lot of how it works is done by gravity, right? So they inject it, or they set it up into your back, and then you can move around a little bit in order to help spread the numb. But because of the way the cord was, the baby was on the cord, and Kat could only be in one position, because she had her left side up, her left hip was kind of not numbed at all. It got like nothing from the epidural. So from that point on, rather than feeling an even spread of pain like through her system, it all concentrates into the one place that she can feel.
So right? It's not like you just feel the pain that you would feel there. It's all those other sensory locations get driven to the one spot that isn't blocked.
So that's like the next thing now. I'm like, here we go. Like, of course, like that is going to happen.
Because it's right, like all of a sudden it was like the epidural was working, but it felt like every time I had a contraction, there was a grenade going off in my hip, and I kept looking down because I was like, my bone is coming out.
Skin.
Yeah.
So if we think about timeline quickly, epidural goes in at 9:30. They say 25 minutes or so for it to work. I reckon at about 10 to 10, Kat was saying like, I feel like I want to push. I feel like I want to push. And they're like, you're not ready. Like, you're only 4 centimeters 2 hours ago. It's not time to push yet. Yeah, it's not time to push yet. Just let the epidural do its thing and you'll feel better. So they do another assessment, and they're like, oh, she's 10 centimeters fully dilated. Like, looks like it's time to have a baby. That's like,
I told you.
Yeah, she was like obviously very happy with herself amongst like all the other emotions. But she's like, I just need 5 minutes. I just need 5 minutes before I start pushing. So I think in the end it was like half an hour.
Yeah, I think it was like 45 minutes. We actually got like some downtime in between, which was not downtime because it was like a grenade going off every 90 seconds.
Yeah. So this is now about 10:30, and it's like time to get pushing. And it's me, Kat, and like 2 midwives. And obviously baby's heart rate is still up on the CCG machine, which Kat can't see, but from the angle where I am, I can see it, and the 2 midwives can see it. And every time Kat has a contraction, baby's heart rate plummets, right? So we played this game for like an hour where it's like Kat has a contraction and everyone holds their breath, like waiting for the heart rate to like come back up after it goes down, which is like probably the most terrifying.
Longest hour.
Yeah. Like it was honestly like, you could feel like the adrenaline just like coursing, and there's like nothing you could do about it. It's kind of like when you're in the stands and your team's down by like 1 point, right? And you've got the ball, like, but you have zero control over the outcome here, but you every much kind of as on the field as you feel they are. So this is going on for, yeah, like I said, an hour. And in that time, there's another 2 like presses on the button calling the docs back in. And they're basically just getting them to look at the trace to see that the longer it goes on for, the more D cells you have, the more tired, the more stressed baby gets. Obviously, the more tired and frustrated and stressed cat gets. The longer the labor goes on for, the more potential there is for something.
And we've been pushing at this point. So
Yeah.
it wasn't just contractions. Like I've been pushing, but felt useless. And they're telling me I'm doing such a good job. And I was like, no, I'm not.
Like, you're doing good. And she's like, I'm not doing good. And then like, we can see the head. And she's like, we're not even close yet. Like she's just like giving them so much shit.
I'm such a beast.
But
like, because I felt like I was trying to push and I was trying to drive like my energy and my power and everything down. And what I felt like was happening was I was pushing down and then it would get to my level of my hips and it'd go straight into the hip and stop going down. So I felt like my pushing was super ineffective.
Which it
so
wasn't.
I was a bit cranky. They told me at one point, they're like, baby has like beautiful black hair. And I was like, I don't care.
So they call it another 2, not codes, but they bring the doctors back in to look at the tracing. And I start to panic again because I'm like, okay, surely there's like a 3 strikes and you're out policy. Like if they're calling the doctors back in every 20 minutes because they're worried, like surely it gets to a point where their doctor's like, all right, like that's it, C-section. Like we're going to cut the baby out. Like this has gone on too long.
And at this point I was like, cut the baby out.
Yeah.
Like I was so mentally tapped out.
So that was, again, probably, I guess we're racking up in terms of like the hardest parts, but like I knew, even though she was saying like, yep, cut it out, like that's not what she wanted. Like if we could do this without having to do that, like that was still going to be like the preference. So the main doc comes back in and she says to Kat, I'm just going to have a feel around and see what's going on. And like the only way that I can accurately describe like what I saw is, for anyone who's never been in this situation, it's kind of like when they're birthing cows and they're like right up like into the cow. Like this woman's like forearm disappeared and Kat starts screaming. And she wasn't doing an assessment. She was actually manually turning the baby because Mattea was kind of coming out ear first. So she manually turns the baby. And I think from that point, things again started to progress a little bit faster. They had you up in stirrups and she said, baby's getting distressed, not real happy about the heart rate. So I think it's time for us. We're going to cut you. We're going to do a episiotomy. And we're going to either use the forceps or the vacuum.
No, they said, she said, we're going to do an assisted birth. And I said, okay, vacuum. And she's like, no, you're going to get an episiotomy. We're going to use forceps. And I was like, no forceps.
Well, she was saying the forceps are easier on the baby. It's less stressful. So I was like, deer in the headlights, like, no, this is like going from bad to worse pretty quickly. Anyway, so she says, Kat's like, no forceps. And she says, well, Katrina, if you don't want to use instruments, you better push this baby out now. Like, I'm going to give you basically like 1 more minute. Like, you have 1 more contraction. If not, we're going to cut you. So Kat, being Kat, like, has an ultimatum, pushes, and like, everyone had told me, like, don't go down the business end. Like, whatever you do, just stay up near Kat's like head and hold her hand and just don't look. But from like where I was, like where she was lying and where I was standing holding her hand, you can still see everything. And so I'm watching and all of a sudden this like head just like pops out and it's scared. Like it came out so fast, it gave me a fright. So she pushes this head, little white head pops out. I'm like, Jesus Christ, that came out so quick. And then you just see the nurses like quickly like take the cord out from around her neck. And then like Kat pushes 1 more time and it's like flies out. They grab her and like bang straight onto Kat's chest. And at that point, like, I don't know whether like that was the point that I became an overly emotional guy and a father, but it was like the whole 12 months prior, like everything that we'd been through, like that was the pinnacle moment. So baby comes out and I'm just
cancer,
like,
your surgery,
yeah, dad, like all of it. Like, and then I'm just like, but the tension from like getting through that point, I suddenly also realized it's now 11:15. Hadn't like eaten or drunk anything the whole time and come off a training session. So I go into this like full body cramp, like my ribs are cramping, like I've got a stitch. Yeah, like being a support person is exhausting. And so Kat's like, come here, like touch your daughter. I'm like, oh, I can't move. Like just give me a minute. But it was also like the moment the baby came out, it was like Kat just like snapped kind of back into
myself.
back into kind of like
Not
it was like everything had worn off like in that one moment. Like it was indescribable. And then when you start to hear her like breathe and cough and like move around, you're like, oh my God, like it's real. Like she's safe. They're like, she's healthy, she's fine, she's breathing. Like just kind of enjoy it for the next hour and a half, and we'll come back in a little while. And so like that point was just like, oh man, like it was. I had a conversation with a friend who had their baby maybe 2 weeks ago, and he was like, he called me as he was getting home from the delivery, and he was like, it is like an experience like nothing that you ever experienced, and even me telling you, you are not going to understand until you've had it. And it was like at that moment I was like, I get it. Like I get it. Like it's just other than the fact that like, you know, obviously it ended well, like the whole kind of roller coaster, and even just seeing like the person that you love, like Kat, like being in a position where she's in so much discomfort and so much physical pain, and you just like so helpless to do like anything about it, was like, it's not a feeling that you ever want to be in as like a partner, but it's also, I think, the best preparation that you can have for like having a child,
everything
right?
that's to come.
And so it was like, is kind of in that like 2 hour stretch, and kind of in the 2 hours beyond then, like, and this is, I guess, where I go a little bit kind of off topic, tangent, deep, but it was like everything that I expected to change in terms of what having a baby would mean from a practical sense, from a physical sense. I think I was as prepared for that as you can be, but I was not expecting like the emotional and the perspective change, right? That
Instant,
like instantly, like you see this like tiny, like helpless little thing, and it's just like, all you want to do is like go out and like get her the world and then like bring it back, you know, like it's just, it's like, it's indescribable. And then even over the, like she's a week today, right? 8 days today. And just like the thinking over the last week, like I change her nappy or like change her clothes or whatever, and she starts screaming, and it's like the worst thing that's ever happened to her. And you're like, I'm sorry. Like, just give me a minute. Just give me a minute. Like, how am I going to, you know, all the things that I wanted to be, like resilient and independent and like, you know, have the ability to overcome and think through challenges and get hurt, but like build that resilience. But how do I assist her become that person when I don't want her to have to go through all those experiences that go into develop those kind of characteristics? Right?
It's really interesting.
It's
and those characteristics, like everything that you described there, are things that I like really pride myself on and identify as being, and that's like a really like the crux of who I feel I am. And I think what was so difficult for me about the labor and delivery was I felt like all of those things disappeared, and like a complete disconnection. Like if I don't have those things, then who am I? And those things are gone. And the only reason I'm getting through this is because my body knows how to, but my mind is no longer there. And yeah, a week later, it's like, okay, I'm starting to like maybe forgive myself for that and come to grips with it a little bit. But it's very interesting.
It's interesting to hear, I guess as a metaphor, right? Like maybe the words when you're like, I think I'm going to die, like maybe that is like completely fitting for the situation, because it is like this whole like birthing, rebirth, like it's actually a pretty like kind of like, not spiritual, what would you call it? Like it's
like I had one of your friends actually had texted me and said that like you know, it's not just like the birth of a baby, but like it's the birth of a mother too, right? And I would argue exactly that would be my point. So I think that like I'm very like, I would not call myself spiritual. I'm not very like woo, but I think that that's a fair description of it.
And I like I don't know, it's like the single, and I guess it's always fitting too, that like you have to have challenge and adversity in order to grow and come out the other side. And it's like, what a period of like of real struggle and like challenge and obstacle that I guess, you know, the nice thing is we got to, when I say go through it together, like obviously you like bore more of the brunt of it than I do. But to go through something like that together, like what I feel that's done for like my and Kat's relationship, and because she's not generally the most like comfortable person with showing like vulnerability or like inability or the fact that she might not be able to completely control and handle a situation. So
not the most comfortable.
from like many perspectives, it was good. Like it was, I don't know, it was not nice, but it was interesting to see that side of Kat and then be like, this only made me love you like more.
Aside that, like,
right?
there's literally nothing else that would have ever put that on display.
Yeah.
Really. Like,
and I guess, you know, I hate using like CrossFit analogies because it's just like
it seems so stupid, but
yeah.
like,
but like usually in a team competition environment, it's like Kat's calling the shots, I'm just doing what I'm told, and like she'll kind of steer the ship on the way through. But to kind of have that role reversal where it was like, you know, even when they called the code pink, like I remember looking at you and being like, don't look over there, just look at me. I'm right here. Like, don't worry what's going on. They're going to do their thing. It's just you and me. Just like keep breathing. And it was kind of, I guess, you know, maybe for me, that is kind of what like fatherhood is, right? It's like feeling comfortable to be in a situation where it's like, this is my job now. Like, it's always been my job to look after you, but it's like, this is why I'm here. This is my role, like to support, to help, to be there, to comfort.
But I think one of the things that like works about our relationship is that I like to be in charge and I'm very organized and I have my way of doing things, and Ben largely lets me do that until it's like, no, it needs to be like this. Like until it's something that's really important, he'll let the little stuff slide. But when it's really important, he's very good at standing up and presenting an argument to make me see the other side. And it was kind of like during the delivery when I was like, just cut her out. Like, I'm done. I'm out. And he's like, no, like that's not happening unless you absolutely medically need it.
Yeah.
Like you've gone through so much already. You're not going to stop.
I'm like, they can see the head, Kat. They can see the hair. Like, just finish the job. But yeah, and I don't know, like the birth and the whole experience, but like definitely the week since, like, I think the transformation in terms of like perspective, outlook, like all the things that I guess when you don't have kids, you don't understand the notion of like helicopter parenting, right? But as soon as you have a newborn, I was like, I totally get how people want to cotton ball like their kids and like not let them get hurt, and like it's hard, it wrenches your heart when they're like crying because they're hungry, let alone like she's going to swing on the tree outside one day, maybe drop and break her arm. Like, what the hell am I going to do then, you know? So it really does shift like your whole perspective on the world, or even things like, you know, why are we doing what we're doing with like MTMM, and why is the ability to work from home and control and like so important to us? And it's like, we've always said it's because we want to have a family, be present. And now that we can actually do that, it's like, yeah, I don't know. It's been an incredible week.
Yeah, big week.
Yeah, I'm sort of speechless. Like, I think even trying to put into words, I guess like what the first week has been is like, I feel like I'm not doing it justice. Like, I don't have a good enough vocabulary to really explain what I feel.
It's just like a crazy amount of learning, and it's insane to think that she's a week old, but at the same time, it's like you can't remember life before.
Yeah. It's funny, even with the house, like we moved in here kind of end of May, and it's been a little bit almost like Airbnb. Like, this is a house, and like Kat's done a fantastic job of furnishing said house.
His money.
But it's felt like a house until, and I guess we kind of talk about the first 2 days like following the birth, but when the girls came home on Friday and it was like bringing them in for the first time, it was like, the house is a home now, you know, like the whole family's here for the first time. And it's strange to see, strange to experience that.
Yeah. So big week, but
yeah,
it almost made me cry like 5 times.
I know.
My heart.
I guess that immediate like post-birth, you know, getting a couple of hours to stay with each other and kind of have, the funniest photo. I got to cut the cord, right?
My God.
So I get to cut the cord when baby comes out, like, I really want to cut the cord. And for anyone who's never touched an umbilical cord, it's kind of like a calamari tube. Like, it's actually much more rubbery than you think it's going to be.
And stark white.
Yeah. So I cut it, and then they go away, and about an hour and a half, they come back and they say, "Oh, Ben, do you want some like skin to skin?" I was like, "Yeah, of course." It's like, "All right, go and have a seat, get yourself ready. What we're going to do is we're going to take baby from mum. We're just going to weigh her, like do all that sort of stuff. And then we'll bring her over to you." So I like take my shirt off, go and sit in like this big maternity chair. And they're like, "Oh, we're going to trim the cord down a little more. It's a little long. Do you want to cut it again?" So I'm like, yeah, sweet. So I get up and they're like, "Oh, here, we'll take a photo." So I give them my phone. And as I'm cutting the cord, they take a few photos. But the photos they take, it looks like in the context of all the delivery room craziness, like I've just pulled my shirt off and I'm just like wandering around like top off in the middle of like this delivery suite. So
it's like one of my favorite photos.
And then, yeah, we got a couple of hours and then it was 4 a.m. and they took you out of the delivery suite, which given like all the COVID stuff, it was like, you have to go home now. So that was tough. But I think by that stage I was like, okay, like I'm so ready to go
I can't
home.
fight, yeah.
But what was hard was the following day. Like I think I was up, like I like slept for 3 hours, dreamt about Kat and Mattea the whole time, woke up at like 8:30, and then all I wanted to do was go back to the hospital, and I wasn't allowed back in there until like 5 p.m. So we only allowed like 2 hours. So that was like a shitty day, which was the Thursday, right? And then the Friday was like, I'm just gonna go in and pick them up. So yeah. And I think we've definitely taken up a full hour getting to this point. So maybe we should make this a two episode part. But it's, and I'll let you guys chat about first week and stuff like that too. But like what a rush.
Yeah. No.
And everything since, you know, like Kat said, it's hard to actually remember a time when she wasn't here, and you know, it's incredible.
I think it's really cool that you guys have. I think it's really cool that you guys have this documented too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so neat. I think about like my
when
mom.
She's 15 and we catch her sneaking out, and it's like just a reminder for me.
I think about my mom and like the baby books that she did for me, which were like so amazing and detailed, and like I know that that's just not. I'll do little things, but that's not my way of kind of memorializing. But it'll be really neat to have these to like for Mattea to listen to down the road. I think it'll be really, really cool as well. And I think on that note, because we have taken so long, I'll maybe go grab her and we can just introduce her, and then we'll do another episode that covers kind of like the first week and recovery and nutrition and the more practical, applicable stuff.
Yeah. Do you want me to get her?
Do you want to go get her?
He's
pining for her.
She's not on her own. Like she's.
Can I go get her?
She's the dog's babysitting.
Yeah, exactly. That's been like the other really cool thing is our dog, who is a bit odd, has just really, really taken to her, and so.
You were concerned about that.
Yeah, so it's been such a big relief. Like she's curious about her and she doesn't mind her, but she's not obsessive, which our dog can get a bit obsessive about things. So I was like, okay, this is a good happy balance.
Yeah. Your family photos look really cute. Everyone looks so happy.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So we had like 2 midwife visits this week, and the midwife came on like day 2 after discharge, and normally they want the dogs and stuff put away, and I went to go put Zap in the office, and she's like, oh no, she's like, I love Roddy's, like leave her out. And so that was great. And then we went down for a walk at the park the other day, and I heard this like accent and saw a Frenchie, and she'd said she'd had a Frenchie, and she was there, so she took our first family photos as well.
That's so cute.
Oh, Miss Mattea.
Say
hello.
Hi. Show me big blue eyes.
Oh. Little truffle pig.
Oh.
I wish she'd be like this peaceful at night. Huh? You say hello? Say hi, honey bags.
Hi.
Yes, we've been gushing about you.
So precious. Oh, too late, you guys.
We got you.
It was funny too. I don't have a lot of experience with newborns, and I think whenever I've kind of been around kids at the in the past, I'm always like, oh, they're so little and I'm not, and I'm terrified. Like, I'm going to drop them or hurt them. But, and that was probably one thing I was worried about too, was like, what if we have this baby and I like don't feel it, you know? Like it feels like, and then as soon as she like was put in my arms, I was like, she's like the perfect size. Like it could not be like a better fit, you know?
Oh. Well, she's not going to stay that size for long.
No, it's the best, Mags. Like in the mornings, wake her up. She has a kind of feed at like 6:30, change her, and then like just put her on my chest and nap for like the next like hour and a half, 2 hours. Oh, it's the best. So I reckon she's grown so much in a week already. Don't you think?
Yeah.
So
pretty cute.
eh?
Good.
Yeah.
Anyways, I can't. I don't know. I'll have to wrap this up somehow. I don't know.
Good luck with that now, Max. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
I guess we'll catch you in the next one.
There's gonna be this like
Mags, happy ending.
random cut.
I'm gonna go look as well.